it showed the vulnerability of Russian forces as Ukraine gets more assistance from the West. And Vladimir Putin certainly doesn't want to talk about that because there's a lot of folks in Russia who are upset about that, including some who are challenging his military leadership.
Well, let's talk some more this morning with Scott Lucas, who is Professor of International Politics at the Clinton Institute, University College, Dublin. Very good to have you with us this morning, Scott. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
So this move by Russia then to have a 36-hour ceasefire over the Russian Orthodox Christmas, do you think it will hold, or is this designed to appease perhaps some unease within Russia about the ongoing war?
Well, it's meaningless, to be honest with you, because Russia bombed with missiles, with drones across Ukraine on Christmas Eve. It did so on Christmas Day. It did so all through New Year's weekend. So the idea that Vladimir Putin has suddenly changed and that this ceasefire, offers the chance for peace, well, you can basically shred that right away. The significance is it's a diversion, which is what you've pointed out to. What's a diversion from? Well, first of all, it's trying to change the news cycle. So we don't talk about those ongoing Russian missile attacks and including the killing of Ukrainian civilians. But it's also a diversion from the fact that the missile and drone attacks are having less effect. Uh, there was no significant damage to Ukraine's energy infrastructure last week. And all 80 plus Iranian drones that Russia fired, all of them were shot down by Ukrainian air defenses. So that's not convenient for Moscow. Secondly, it's not convenient for Moscow that its attempt to take territory in eastern Ukraine, pushing back Ukrainian counteroffensives, have stalled. It's tried for now 8 months to take a single city called Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine. It can't do so despite throwing everything at it, and it's unlikely to do so. And this is also a big diversion from what may have been the biggest development over the past week, and that is on New Year's Day, a Ukrainian rocket attack killed and wounded hundreds of Russian soldiers in a barracks in eastern Ukraine, absolutely leveled it. And it showed the vulnerability of Russian forces as Ukraine gets more assistance from the West. And Vladimir Putin certainly doesn't want to talk about that because there's a lot of folks in Russia who are upset about that, including some who are challenging his military leadership.
Um, we know that, as you said, that attack killed hundreds, or certainly hundreds of casualties, destroying that barracks in eastern Ukraine. I'm assuming here, Scott, I mean, do correct me if I'm wrong, but has this been reported in Russia? Is there much detail about what's happened?
Yes, what was significant here is, Anna, is that the Russians almost never admit casualties. They've never given a full total of their casualties. When the Moskva, their Black Sea flagship, went down, again, probably with hundreds of casualties uh, last spring, they admitted one death, a total of one. This time, because people knew what had happened within Russia, you can't completely shut them off from knowing that their sons, their husbands had been killed. The Russian Defense Ministry admitted initially 65 troops killed and then said 89.
Right.
And as I said, the actual casualty figure of killed and wounded is likely to be much higher. But even that admission of 89 was significant because, Anna, what happened is there's a group of Russian military analysts called mill blockers who no longer think that the Russian generals and that the Russian Defense Ministry can win this war. And some of those military analysts are siding with a guy named Yevgeny Prigozhin. Now, Prigozhin is most famous or infamous for being the founder of the Wagner Group mercenaries. Those mercenaries are active in many parts of the world, and they are now on the front lines in eastern Ukraine. And Prigozhin is jockeying really to overtake the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. He wants to be Putin's right-hand guy as this war drags on. In other words, the more that Russia loses, ironically, the more that Prigozhin might gain.
It's interesting to hear that explanation that you have given, Scott, and the Wagner Group historically have not been so out in the open in terms of us knowing exactly what has been going on. But now you're saying there is this rivalry growing within their leadership.
Yeah, in other words, for years, because the Wagner Group has been around for many years.
Mm.
It was an effective tool for Vladimir Putin and the Russian military. If they didn't want to officially declare that they were involved in a conflict, they used Wagner. They used it in Syria for years to prop up the Assad regime and to try to turn the course of that conflict. They have used them as effectively the advance force to support the extension of Russian economic and political influence in places like the Central African Republic or Mali.
Mm.
What's the difference this time? Well, Wagner was inside Ukraine since the start of the invasion. It wasn't very high profile. But then Prigozhin said, look, if this war is dragging on, and if it looks like that others within Russia are going to have their reputations destroyed by it, here's my opportunity. Here's my opportunity not just simply to be effectively an assistant to Vladimir Putin, but to be a frontline guy as well within the Kremlin. And I think you're going to see Wagner carry on for this way through the spring, because in the past week, let's have one more important development. Uh, the Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, he wasn't on the front line in Ukraine. The Russian commanders were nowhere to be seen. Who was there on the front line in eastern Ukraine, meeting with the Wagner Group mercenaries, telling them what a great job they were doing, even as they were taking losses? Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Very interesting to hear that detail, get your analysis this morning. Do appreciate you joining us. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Anna.